Devastated by crack cocaine in the 1980s, Washington, D.C. became known as the murder capital of the country. Growing up at the epicenter of this violence, 67 rising seventh graders were promised college scholarships by an area businessman. The film Southeast 67 combines raw, never-before-seen archival film footage of D.C. with present-day footage and intimate interviews with the students 20 years later, as they reflect on the hope and the anguish of trying to seize an improbable dream. The film is directed by Betsy Cox, and my first guest is one of the educators in the film, Steve Bumbaugh. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's my pleasure. We were talking a little bit earlier, and I saw the film. I totally love it, and so I'm really excited about geeking out with you on this film. Now, can you just tell what kind of inspired it? Because it's really interesting that you're actually in the film. So how did you and Betsy connect?
So there was an area businessman named Stuart Bainham who financed the program. And about 4 or 5 years ago, I ran into his daughter at an education conference. And she said, "How are the Dreamers doing?" That's what we called our students, Dreamers. And I said, "They're doing really well." And we started talking a little bit about the Dreamer program. And I said, in fact, instead of taking my word for it, you guys should do an evaluation of the program and see where the kids are now. And they hired an organization to conduct a formal summative evaluation of the program. And that whet her and her father's appetite for actually doing a film.
Wow. Now, is Betsy Mr. Bainham's daughter?
Betsy is just somebody who's worked with the family over the years, and she's an excellent filmmaker.
Yeah, definitely. I just love the story. Maybe you can tell me how you got involved in terms of being one of the educators with the 67.
Yeah, so I'm from the D.C. area. And I graduated from college at the end of the 80s when the city was really devastated by violence and by the crack epidemic. And I was really fortunate to be able to go to a great university, and it was my way out. And I wanted to teach. I wanted to use the sort of skills I had acquired in college and pass them on to young folks who were, through no fault of their own, being raised in difficult circumstances. So I really, really wanted to teach.
Okay. And maybe you can just talk a little bit about the I Have a Dream program for those in the audience that might be watching, listening, that don't really know what it's about.
Yeah. So the I Have a Dream program is almost like a franchise model. A funder has to promise to pay college tuition for students, and he or she usually hires adults to serve as mentors to these students over quite a few years. Mr. Bainham actually hired a number of us to serve not just as mentors, but actual teachers. So I'd like to describe our program as a school within a school.
And you said that you were actually with the students that were in the documentary for 6 years of their life, from the time they were, 12 to 18 when they went off to college?
So these students were adopted into the program the summer before their 7th grade, and we stayed with them through their graduation from high school. So the program was 6 years in total.
Okay, so you have an area businessman, and we'll say he's white, right? Because part of the documentary is the fact that, this kind man goes and he says, you know what, I'm gonna give 67 inner city kids a chance at, making it out of, as you said, the inner city Anacostia. So for those students, as they started going through, in the film we just see how they're dealing with a lot of things, right? So anyone would say, okay, wow, this is a magnificent opportunity, a scholarship to college, free ride, how can you mess that up? But can you talk about some of the conflict that actually came in?
Well, I'm a parent now, and I have a 12-year-old son, and the notion that, and he's not being raised in the projects of Southeast D.C. with murder all around him. He's being raised in a high-income, quiet neighborhood. And the idea that I could incentivize his behavior on a daily basis with something that's going to happen in 6 years isn't realistic. When you compound that with the fact that these kids were living in the highest homicide the zip code in the United States with the highest homicide rate at the time the entire country was absorbed in this murder epidemic, it becomes unrealistic to think that sort of a far-off promise of college is going to change their behavior.
Right. I mean, that's amazing to me. One of, I think it's Tennille, was saying how so many of her friends, she saw her friends leave the building in body bags. Can you talk a little bit about, because that's one of the things I thought was interesting about the film, is that you have this great opportunity, but many of the students were more so worried about, their mom ODing or an abusive boyfriend back home. And those are the things that were really tugging at them as they had such a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah. So these were children who were dealing with something that I think I said in the movie looked to me like a low-level civil war. We had about 500,000 people in D.C. back in those days, and we were having about 500 murders a year. And most of them were concentrated in the area where they lived. So this year we're really complaining about 162 murders. That's nothing compared to the way it used to be. Mm-hmm. So they were seeing death all the time. Every single one of my students witnessed people being killed. And when you're growing up under that kind of stress and strain, sometimes the adults succumb to alcoholism, sometimes they succumb to substance abuse, and the kids have to deal with this. So a lot of our kids, to put it mildly, were distracted with worries about their mothers.
Mm-hmm. I think one of the cool things about the film is seeing how you all reconnect with the Dreamers. And it honestly, I mean, you could feel the love, you could feel like this just kinship. Can you talk a little bit about that? And I know we were talking earlier about how now, in this generation, some social media, Facebook, whatever the case, you can really keep in contact with them. But how has that been over the years?
Yeah, so I ran this program with a woman named Phyllis Rumbarger, and I think we sort of got that these kids needed an environment where there were high expectations for them and where the people caring for them were gentle. So we were just nice to the kids. That sounds like a platitude, but it's not. I mean, they live in a neighborhood where people are always telling them what to do. Take off your hat when you get into school. You're buying stuff in a corner store behind plexiglass. People look at you expecting you to do something wrong. And Phyllis and I come along and we're like, hey, come into after-school tutoring, have a snack. And we try to make it fun, and we try to be gentle because we wanted them to feel safe. And they and their mothers and their grandmothers and their fathers really responded to that because there were not a lot of opportunities for that kind of safety and that kind of fun in their neighborhood. So it was a really meaningful experience for them. And it was a really meaningful experience for us as well. Yeah. All of us are thrilled when we get to see each other again.
Let me ask you, on that note, what does it feel like now in your lifetime to look back and to know that you made a big impact in someone's life?
Well, it's great, actually. It's really gratifying. And I had that job right out of college, and it's really unusual when you're that young to be able to have a real job where you're working with real people and impacting them, where people actually want you to come to work every day. It means something to them. So to me, it was a thrill. I really enjoyed the job, and I was grateful that I wasn't sitting behind a desk plugging numbers into spreadsheets, which is what most of my classmates from college were doing. So, and it really directed the rest of my career, just being in that environment and seeing just the sort of unfairness that these kids were subjected to through the fact that they were born in a specific neighborhood through no fault of their own.
Wow. Well, Steve, I feel like I could talk to you all day about this film. I really enjoy it. I think it's an amazing movie, and it's a story that we don't get to see that often. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.